I think the idea for starting Historic Collinsville was born when Joanne was an elementary school teacher in the 70s. She figured out if she brought in a relic or talked to them about something about the past, that it intrigued them and they started learning.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Hometown View. Today we're at Historic Collinsville, which is in a small community right outside of Clarksville, Tennessee, in the Middle Tennessee region. And this is Southside. So we're going to learn all about this unique place here and just its historical significance.
I'm Jeff Harris, and we are at Historic Collinsville. This is an 1860 settlement that has been recreated. So all of the buildings here are authentic buildings. They just didn't sit where they sit now. So it's a recreated village set at about 1860. All the buildings are authentic buildings. Most of them came from a mile or two around here. They were all brought in, and so they're real buildings. They just didn't sit where they're sitting now. Some of them were actually moved on a flatbed truck intact. Some were actually disassembled with the logs numbered and then put back together. Some of them were in such bad shape there's only portions of the original logs left, but they finished them out. So it's basically set up like a village would have been, with different outbuildings and all the necessary things for a village. But they worked on that for about 20 years. They opened in the 90s to the public with volunteer help all the way up until just in the last few years, and now we are owned by Montgomery County. It's called Historic Collinsville because the community of Southside that you went right through to get here used to be called Collinsville. The postmaster changed the name of Collinsville to Southside in 1880 because the mail kept getting missent to Collierville, Tennessee, so they changed the name. It's just supposed to be like a sample village, any small village that would have the vital things like a blacksmith shop and that sort of thing here. But this was started by the Weekleys. They were a married couple who lived right down the hill on this farm. This was the big Weekley farm with 640 acres. They farmed it all their life, but they set aside this village here as a way to teach children and let people see what their past or their heritage would have been like. The cabin, the smaller cabin that's kind of midways over there, kids will love that. That's the wildlife center. So kids need to go in there. There's all kinds of animals. There are no live animals, so no one will get bit. But it's full of animals. Most of those are the trophies of Glenn and Joanne, who were avid hunters. So most of that came from them. There's two rooms. The first room are animals native to Tennessee. The second room are where they traveled all over the world hunting. So there's caribou, moose, mountain lion, all those kind of things in the second room. So make sure the kids that want to get to go in there. We just ask that you refrain as best as kids can from touching the animals. And then this barn right here, that's an open air barn. That's actually the way it was built. That's built out of chestnut logs. It's open on purpose. So that was for air cured tobacco, which we call burley. You hang that in the barn and it was cured by air. No fire built under it like we're used to seeing dark fired tobacco. That was for burley. But that's built out of chestnut logs, which we know chestnuts, the old chestnut trees are now extinct. So no more chestnut logs like that. But they prized chestnut logs because they would preserve forever. So that barn is still there. This little building right here is interesting. That's the blacksmith shop. You can look in there and see where the blacksmith, who was probably the most important in a community because of what he did. He repaired and made all sorts of metal for tools and that sort of thing, horseshoes. So a lot of times we have a blacksmith in there demonstrating his craft. So they'll build a fire in the little charcoal fireplace with bellows, get it hot, pound it on an anvil, and make things there. So sometimes when we have demonstrations, we have a blacksmith. The next little bitty house right straight across, that's the loom house. So people who might be interested in weaving loom, there's a full-size loom in there that's probably 200 years old, and it is actually set up and threaded The weaver comes and demonstrates, and it's just how she left it last week. So it's actually a working loom. But that was common in the day because a loom was so large, it took up too much room in your house. So most affluent people would build an outhouse to house their loom and work out of that house. They would also share it with their neighbors. And then right in front of the great big house down there, another outbuilding is the smokehouse. So the smokehouse was where they preserved their meat. So before refrigeration, the only way to keep meat from spoiling was to cure it in the smokehouse. And then the big house, that's the biggest house on the property. That's a very neat house. It was built in 1855. It's set about 2 miles from here. And we know who it was built for. We know all the history about the lady. But that house was built in 1855 by Miss Kitty Batson, who was a young lady and very attractive and was getting married. Her father built her that house for her wedding present. Her father was very wealthy. Built her that house. She lived there for a couple of years with her first husband. He died of some illness. We don't know what, but he died young. They had no children. She married again, continued living in the house. This husband happened to walk outside one day to an outbuilding and got shot and killed, mistaken for a Civil War deserter. This was during the war. So he was killed, left her with 3 children. She married a third husband, still lived in the same house. Luckily, they both lived to be old age and they had more children. Then on down the hill, there's the Wildwood Church and School. So that's a little bitty cabin, and it was actually built to be a church and school, and it's set about 2 miles from here. It's tiny, and I would have been miserable going to school there because they sat on little benches or even going to church. Sorry, Craig. It was very uncomfortable to sit and tiny, but that was the church and school. And across the street from it is another little house, and we set that up to be the teacher's house. So it actually is the only property here that's actually decorated a little bit later. It's actually set up to be 1915 because she had a wood cook stove. 1915. Everything else is 1860. So that's the gist of it. Okay, so this is the Weekly House, home of Glenn and Joanne, who started Collinsville. This was their personal house. So they lived here till 21 when they died. So we got it this year, and this is the first year we've opened it for the museum. And you really wouldn't look twice at that house when you pass by, but it's pretty fascinating inside. So we thought we needed to show it off. So here is a little picture board that shows how the house kind of morphed from what it was when they moved in 1960. This was the sharecropper house for this farm. So it was very crudely built, 3 rooms and no indoor plumbing. So they got it in 1960. So Glenn and Joanne married in 52, but they lived down there with Grandma in the big house. So Joanne had said Glenn was determined to be a farmer, and farming was very tough. And she said, I saw very little hope that we would ever be able to have a house of our own. So when they offered them this tenant house, they took it. So they worked on it and fixed it up, made it a little bit more pretty, added plumbing. And then in 67, they added a whole nother room onto the house because it was pretty tiny. And then again in 72, they added a log structure on it, so they actually doubled the length of the house across the front. So that's what made it look so much bigger, was adding that log room. Then again in 81, they actually bought a structure and moved it intact down here. So this little building here that they added onto their house actually used to sit in Southside at the 4-way stop. And it had been, at the turn of the century, it was Dr. Sterling Niblett's medical office. So it sat empty for years. Glenn and Joanne had their eye on it because the roof matched theirs as far as the pitch of the roof. It was a perfect match. So they actually ended up buying it, moved it down here intact. They made them move it in the middle of the night because they had to disconnect every power line that they encountered along the way. So it was over a mile away. So they made them do it at night to disrupt fewer people. But everybody in Southside thought they were crazy. because they bought that dilapidated old building. But once you see it, you'll understand why they wanted to do it. It's pretty fabulous. So this little house next door is just a little modular home. They put that in for Joanne's mom when she was 95. She couldn't stay by herself anymore, so she lived out of town. So they brought her here, and the mom lived here until she died. And then after Mom died, Joanne said, we always thought we would move that away because it ruins the look of the front of our house. But she said it was so handy to have it because anytime we had company, there was a perfect place for company to stay. And she was 84 at the time when she said this. She said, someday we're going to get old and we might need help. And that would be a good place for help to stay. But as it turned out, they didn't have to have that. In 2021, they both contracted COVID, and so they died 3 days apart in 21. So very sad. He was 89, she was 86. So when he died, he still had cattle out here in the field. Joanne was 86. She had been retired from her job 1 year. This is just kind of a tribute wall to them. We're standing in the original part of the house. So that was the front room. This middle room was the dining room. The kitchen was back there behind that door. This shows off Glenn's gun collection. He was an avid hunter along with Joanne. I'm told some of these are very valuable just because they're so perfect. That actually belonged to Governor Austin Peay and his wife Sally. They were from Clarksville, and it was in Governor Peay's house. So Joanne sort of doubted that, so she found Austin Peay's sister still alive in 1960. Her name was Amaryllis. She called her and said, if that's Austin Peay's furniture, why is it in an antique shop? And she said, I can tell you exactly why it's in the antique shop. It's taller than 8 feet, won't go in anybody's house. So we let that one go. They actually built this room themselves, and all of these rock in the fireplace, they picked up themselves off the farm. So this is Joanne's brother. His name was Millard. But his nickname was Buster, so it's kind of funny because he was really Buster Brown. That was his name. Sadly, it was his funeral they attended where they caught COVID. So a week later, they were on their deathbeds. This is the oldest piece of furniture in the house right here. Joanne said in one of her videos that this was the most special thing in the whole house. It belonged to Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. She saw this advertised at what she called a highbrow auction. And she said, I knew I just had to have that. So she went to that auction and actually brought this home. It's Longfellow, so I think it's very cool. Right here in Southside, Tennessee. The back of it is made out of a feed sack. So there's the stamped advertisement for the feed sack on the back of that. So I guess that's it.
This is just a preview of the weekly house at Historic Collinsville. There's still so much to discover on this beautiful property. A very special thank you to Jeff Harris for showing us around today. All right, that's going to be a wrap for this video on Hometown View. This is Historic Collinsville. Be sure to check it out if you're in the Middle Tennessee region. I'm going to put the web address in the description below. Have a great day.